This is a roll of the dice.
This is Bruce McCandless II, floating hundreds of feet from his space shuttle.
Then he moves out to 300 feet.
Without a tether. Why would they do it? Why would they risk that he would float out into space forever?
And just about 2 minutes ago, Bruce McCandless put on the jet backpack, and he is now flying free.
Bruce McCandless and Robert Stewart could have floated out into space. This was the first untethered spacewalk in history, and explaining why they did it requires decoding the forgotten objectives.
You've really opened a new era for the world in space with this mission.
Understanding tools from jetpacks to trunnion pin attachments, and taking a broader view of what NASA dreamed it might be and what it gave up.
Hi.
I went to the National Archives for the first time for this story.
I think I might be breaking the law by sitting up here.
It was pretty awesome. I got myself a locker.
It's my locker now. It's like high school, but cooler.
I wanted to find a film strip related to this mission, STS-41B, an archive that wasn't on the internet yet. From the beginning of the space program, NASA knew that EVAs
It stood for extravehicular activity.
would be necessary to their mission. That was the reason that the Gemini 4 mission, listen, I'm gonna say it Gemini, not Gemini, like some of the astronauts did.
Gemini 4 was a major advance in manned spaceflight operations.
I'm not an astronaut, okay? Just get that out of the way. That was the reason that the Gemini 4 mission included astronaut Ed White's walk in space, slightly earlier than they planned. But for that first walk in space, they needed to solve two problems: safety and movement. How do you go out in space without floating off into it forever? And how do you move around without gravity?
He was satisfied and ready to begin EVA.
This is the Gemini 4 control panel with a jack for the EVA oxygen disconnect. The umbilical, a long rope, provided oxygen and security along with a nylon tether. The chest pack regulated it and provided an emergency oxygen supply.
If the umbilical line should fail, the astronaut would have enough oxygen to support him for at least 9 minutes.
But what's really ingenious is the movement. Okay, so I just want to tell you that I've been deep in the weeds on this for a while. I've been on these technical report servers, and it is really hard when you're looking for info about NASA to find stuff that is not biased and that is really factual. That's probably true of the broader media landscape too. That's why I'm so excited to be partnering up with Ground News, which was, I'm serious, it was founded by a former NASA engineer, which is a great tie-in to this video. It's an app and website that is trying to make the news more transparent. They have aggregated thousands of articles. They will give you visual cues to tell you where the bias leans, the reliability, the ownership of the source. They'll compare headlines so that you can cut through the bias, and you can get a clear, accurate view of the stories that matter. So let me show you a Ground News story to tell you what I mean. Let's look at this story about a crazy plan for a moon maglev. It's got 30 sources covering the story right now. Reporting looks quite even. If we scroll down to the ownership chart, you can see that 21% are owned by government sources, so that's a cue to be a little skeptical of those sources. And I can sort by factuality. Here, look right here. I love the mixed factuality notation. It puts me totally on guard. Probably wouldn't have noticed that this was an AI image without Ground News' advice to kind of read carefully. So now I can go back to a more reputable, high factuality source. Here's Gizmodo, high factuality, left-leaning, but you can tell even by the preview that this article is a bit more substantive than the other one. If you want to build a healthy news routine the way I have, check out the link in my description, ground.news/Phil Edwards, and get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use. When you do that, you don't just support me and this channel, you're supporting an independent news operation that is trying to make the news more transparent. Thanks.
The pilot also carries a small maneuvering unit during EVA, the so-called space gun.
This is the handheld maneuvering unit. It sprayed oxygen in its first incarnation, here to brake and here to go forward. You'd simply aim it in the direction that you wanted to go. The training to use it was air hockey. Seriously. This is a later training exercise where David Scott is floating on the floor, just like an air hockey table, on an air-bearing lift pad to test the HHMU. So now you can understand this grainy photo of Gemini 4's Ed White. He's testing the HHMU on an air-bearing floor, and they have miniature little pucks to float the umbilical cord as well. Now, if you still don't get it, I figured out how to conduct a recreation in my studio. Thank you. Thank you. Really broke the budget on that one. And that's what worked in action. Here's the HHMU, the tether, and Ed White having the time of his life.
He elected to go for EVA on the third revolution.
Get my feet out. I think I'm dragging a little bit, so I don't want to fire the gun. Okay, I'm out. Okay, now. Okay, I put a little roll in, took it right out. Okay, I rolled off, I'm rolling to the right now. Under my own influence.
But it wasn't all perfect. The gun's compressed air was quickly depleted.
I had very good control with it, I just needed more air.
And it required one arm to be occupied at all times, holding that HHMU. But the scariest part, for me at least, might be at the beginning. Did you see it?
There goes it's like a thermoplast, yeah, it is.
Untethered, it floated into space, never to be seen again.
CBS News selective color coverage of the mission of Gemini 9.
39 minutes, 32 seconds after the hour.
The Gemini 9 spacewalk tried to go further, but it didn't go as smoothly, and that was, in part, because of the tether. Gemini 9 started just a year after Gemini 4, but with big ambitions. Astronaut Gene Cernan had trained to use the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit. Here it is, the AMU. I love this shot because it is a very weird pose, but it is also explanatory. It weighed 166 pounds loaded. 12 thrusters in different directions were controlled by sidearms and shot out hydrogen peroxide.
And we feel that just because we're extravehicular, there's no reason to go out there with one hand tied behind your back. In other words, you ought to be able to use two hands to accomplish any desired task.
The legs were covered to protect Cernan from the hot gas. He had to put on his EVA suit, get the AMU from the outside of the craft, and conduct a spacewalk, all while tethered to that umbilical. It didn't go well. He called the tether the snake. They were trying to use this AMU, but his visor was getting fogged up. He could barely move.
I had to work continually against a pressure suit, against the stiffness of the suit.
And a lot of it was made more difficult because of this umbilical, the tether, the snake.
And this is a point at which Tom and I decided to abort the AMU mission, not knowing really how far we could get.
So how did they get the space jetpack back and decide to lose the tether? Bruce McCandless, the eventual untethered flyer,
Columbia, this is Houston.
is capsule communicator, Capcom, the man talking to Apollo 11.
Did you think I just owned a mustard turtleneck?
Geographical features doesn't do us all that much
I know,
good.
he makes it look better, but I was inspired.
The point is, McCandless was a long-time NASA legend. He knew what he was doing, and that made him instrumental to getting those space jetpacks back in action. They started training underwater to get used to zero-G, even if they didn't use the AMU in space. This is the footage I found at the National Archives.
There's our guy.
McCandless training for that EVA in the neutral buoyancy simulator. The neutral buoyancy simulator becomes a common stage in training. Here you can see just how hard it is to get these things on, and then you get an idea of the process involved. You can see that it's just a big pool that they are kind of diving into. In addition to this, moon EVAs with some gravity helped NASA further optimize. Skylab, the space station in 1973, 1974, experimented with weightless EVAs and slightly different unit tests as well, like of the automatically stabilized maneuvering unit.
If you want to get a different position, I'll turn this thing off and give you some more rope.
Here's Bruce McCandless testing one in 1973. But they really needed a compelling reason to use this again in space. And they got it.
The most significant goal will be the MMU spacewalk and the practice for the rescue of the Solar Max satellite, which has been floating around there.
They were there to deploy 2 satellites, including that Westar one that I showed in the beginning. But the bigger goal, they were testing if the MMU could help them fix the Solar Max satellite. So this wasn't just a test of their new jetpack, it was a test of NASA's vision for itself, for its future as a kind of space services company.
We have solid rocket booster ignition and liftoff of Challenger and the 10th space shuttle flight.
They had 2 approaches to EVAs. One was basically a long extendable arm. An astronaut could hook their feet into it and use it to be controlled in space. You can see Robert Stewart practicing on it underwater here. Look at his feet. The other was the MMU.
They spend hours in big water tanks testing their James Bond-style backpacks, or manned maneuvering units, as NASA calls them.
This unit ran 330 pounds and was propelled with nitrogen. Procedure would be similar to that planned for the astronaut maneuvering unit. Servicing while stowed, donning the large pack, and egress, floating out into space. For a bunch of reasons, they really wanted to use the MMU instead of the HHMU. Astronauts needed to go pretty far, 300 feet from the shuttle, and they needed both hands to hold stuff like the trunnion pin attachment device, which would, in theory, be used to lock onto Solar Max. So they wanted something that could go pretty far, but also had a hands-free mode so they could hold stuff. But, crucially, they also wanted to ditch the tether, because they thought that it was safer.
Basically, I was going to do roughly the same thing, but I was going to carry that tether.
Gemini 9's Gene Cernan actually explained the logic.
Should I have had a failure, and I fired a thruster and went to the end of the tether, I literally could have got wound around and gone like a whip around the spacecraft, the Gemini spacecraft. Could have been more of a problem than it was a safety line.
The tether was the snake. There were many tethered portions of the EVAs, but for that Solar Max test, well...
Traveling up to 320 feet away from the shuttle without a tether, using only the jet-powered backpack.
What's it like to work out there, unattached to the shuttle and maneuvering freely in space?
We believe that maneuvering units, first time working unattached, we're literally opening a new frontier in what man can do in space.
This was the whole essence of the mission, in a sense, wasn't it? That this be a success. I mean, this really mattered far more than the communication satellites and all that.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think we must remember that this is a space transportation system.
McCandless and his manned maneuvering unit constitute a separate spacecraft of their own now.
On the next mission, the Solar Max mission, this patch, the trunnion pin attachment actually didn't work correctly. But they were so confident in the MMU that they improvised, untethered, in space.
And the MMU, again, performed flawlessly. It was a fairly easy task just to fly up and grab the solar array and walk out to the edge of it and try and stabilize the satellite.
It was ultimately stabilized by people back on Earth. The MMU worked again in 1984 to retrieve satellites from earlier missions, and a lot of these MMU missions were actually centered around stuff that had gone wrong, but I think it shows that they had big confidence in this pack, and they also had confidence in their vision of NASA as a space platform. But on January 28th, 1986, Challenger launched for the last time.
And liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Obviously a major malfunction.
At the end of the footage I found, they just cut to an empty sky for the last minutes of the tape. After the Challenger disaster, the MMU program was viewed as too unsafe. I didn't want to bring the Challenger disaster into this video, but it's clear that MMU cutbacks were a response. It was NASA not wanting to take another big risk. Now, there are complications here. They had discovered that the space shuttle was pretty maneuverable, so maybe they didn't really need big jetpack flights, and they got good at using those arms, too. Satellites also got better. And they developed MMU updates, though I think it's telling that it was considered more of a backup plan. The acronym for the last update is safer. But it is hard not to see the Challenger disaster as a turning point for all of NASA, a point of reduced ambition, a tether. I think crazy space jetpack is enough reason to tell this story, but there are other reasons too. The most obvious one is that sometimes things are safer without a tether, as paradoxical as it might seem. The thing to keep us safe, the umbilical, can become a snake. But I think that there's another lesson too. We don't know where risk will come from.
We had some qualms about it before the flight.
Spacewalkers survived floating in a suit out in space.
We had backup procedures to go get them if anything went wrong with their equipment, so by the time flight came along, we were quite happy with the idea, and it turned out to be not bad in practice.
Disaster came a few miles above Earth. So you have to prepare the best you can. A thermal glove is lost to the void. You watch and you learn. You float on an air hockey floor. You watch and you learn. You develop the safeties and contingencies. You watch and you learn. And that's all you can control. And after that, Bruce McCandless went to work. Hey, that is it for this one. I'm doing this vlog style because when I originally recorded this, I forgot to thank Beat Monster for giving me the idea to this video in the comments. So thank you for that idea. I really enjoyed delving into this. If you've got ideas for other iconic photos or NASA moments or whatever that you'd like me to get into in the future, let me know. If you haven't been here before, this is a channel where I look into history of business, technology, and see how it kind of affects the way that we live today. There will be a reaction video to this one up on Patreon, and I'm also going to start a free newsletter that runs through Patreon. So if you go to my Patreon and you click join for free, you'll get access to a free newsletter that lets you get notifications when I have a new video about to publish. Otherwise, that is it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here. And yeah, I hope you have a good week, whether you choose to stay tethered or break free from anything in your life. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.